Please divorce me now. What? Something triggered me to take Hannah to the hospital, where the doctor's shocking statement left me astonished. After learning the details, I was furious and devised a revenge plan. I will always protect Hannah. I vowed to protect the exhausted Hannah and, with the help of an ally, showed hell to the person causing her suffering. My name is Allie Scott. I'm a 35-year-old entrepreneur. My business mainly involves running an apparel company, but I also dabble in restaurants, cosmetics brands, and recently, advertising agencies. My husband, John, is a tutor, mainly looking after high school students. He has a daughter named Hannah who is in high school. She is his child from his previous wife, who ran off with another man, leaving John to take care of her. Hannah just graduated from middle school and will be a high school student this spring. At 15, she seems mature for her age and shows a keen interest in my work, actively asking about what I do and the satisfaction it brings. Every time Hannah asks me something, I am impressed by her eagerness to learn. Did I ever think about my future this much when I was in high school? If the younger me saw Hannah, she would have been overwhelmed by her enthusiasm. Having become a family with these 2 months have passed. Hannah, now attending high school, seems to enjoy her days, often sharing school stories during our meals together. John, on the other hand, is more of a listener and seldom talks about himself. While it's not good to talk too much about oneself, I sometimes feel lonely wishing he would share more. However, we married because we don't unnecessarily interfere with each other. For me, busy with my days, prying would be a waste of time. Most men who approached me after I started my company were after my money. Annual income, business secrets, the brands of accessories I wear. All they talked about was money, which I found tiresome. Then I met John. Unlike others, he first asked about my hometown and memories from my student days. Perhaps it helped that we were both from Alabama. Being from a rural area of Colorado and him from a more urban part, we had different experiences during our youth, which made for nostalgic and engaging conversations. From there, we hit it off. As we began to meet more frequently, John opened up to me about Hannah, and I developed a good impression of him. Honestly, I think Hannah needs a mother. I grew up with brothers only and had little interaction with women. There are many times I don't understand the feelings of a girl her age, and I often find myself at a loss on how to connect with Hannah. This made me want to be there for John. However, I had never raised a child before and didn't think I could become Hannah's mother. But it didn't have to be a motherly role. If I could be a place of comfort for John and Hannah, I was more than willing to live with them. With this thought, I resolved to face life with Hannah, who reciprocated my feelings. Thanks to this, when Hannah graduated from middle school, John and I got married. Hannah, crying tears of joy, congratulated us. "From now on, I'd rather have you as a sister than a mom. I want to be with Allie." At our wedding, Hannah, holding a bouquet, expressed her wishes to me. Moved by her feelings, I resolved to do my best. Unbeknownst to me, something was amiss. It was when John remarried and Hannah was on summer break. John started to make more time to spend alone with Hannah. "You have work, don't you? I'll take Hannah out so we won't be in your way." Wait. I thought Allie was coming too. As a CEO running multiple companies, my days were hectic. There were days I wouldn't return home, and when I did, I was glued to my home PC, swamped with work. Finding a few hours a week to spend with my family was a challenge. John often left the house with Hannah, considering my workload. At that time, I believed he was just being considerate. "I'm sorry, Hannah. I want to join you, but I just can't get away from work right now. The day after tomorrow, I've booked a table at your favorite restaurant, so let's have dinner together then." Allie, is it absolutely impossible? John had suggested a family outing the day before. But when work came up at the last minute, forcing me to cancel, I explained this to Hannah, who looked at me anxiously. Normally agreeable, she clutched at my sleeve that day, unusually shaky and fearful. Her expression was scared, and in a voice so faint John couldn't hear, Hannah seemed to be pleading for help. Concerned, I gently placed my hands on her shoulders and spoke softly. "What's wrong, Hannah? Is there something? Come on, Hannah. We shouldn't take up too much of Allie's time, should we? Let's go. Dad's going to take you somewhere really special today." Hannah's unusual fearfulness caught my attention, and just when I tried to inquire about the situation, John interrupted me and firmly pulled Hannah's hand, heading towards the entrance. Hannah seemed like she wanted to say something to me, looking back with a sense of reluctance. Ultimately, I couldn't speak with Hannah that day because they returned home late at night. Whenever I tried to find a moment to talk to Hannah, John oddly would start talking, seemingly keeping her away from me. It was the first time I felt he was deliberately distancing her from me. A month passed. Work settled down, and I had more time at home. I decided to take over the household duties to make up for the time I couldn't spend with my family right after getting remarried, and that's when I noticed something off about Hannah. Thanks for the meal. It's natural for a girl her age to be conscious of her figure and pursue beauty, but her lack of appetite was concerning. She used to eat a normal amount before graduating from middle school. Now, she hardly touched half of the food I prepared and couldn't even finish a single bowl of rice. Not to mention her complexion looked pale. Worried, I brought this up to John. Hey, don't you think Hannah's a bit too lacking in appetite? She seems to have lost some weight since we last saw her. Have you heard anything about her feeling unwell or being troubled by something at school? You're worrying too much. Maybe it's this: she liked my cooking so much that she doesn't find your food appealing? I was taken aback by John's response. Allie, even before we got married, you never cooked for Hannah, right? I've always been the one taking care of the household. Now that your work has calmed down, you're trying to play the mother, which might not sit well with her, especially if she's in her rebellious phase. His words were incomprehensible to me. There are things you should and shouldn't say, even if you've had a drink. Besides, it was John who insisted I prioritize my work over household chores. And now he's implying that Hannah's condition is my fault? His words filled me with unease. I'll take care of Hannah and the household, so don't worry. He had said when we got married, encouraging me to make that choice. It was unfair to hear such things now, given that assurance. It was utterly disappointing. Well, I think it's just typical teenage rebellion. Just leave her be for now. Didn't you go through a phase like that, Allie? Sometimes, it's better for the kids if the adults don't fuss over them too much during these times. While I couldn't agree with John's dismissive words, I did recall my own teenage years when I didn't want my parents nagging me. I understood what he meant, but it didn't make the situation any less frustrating. But Hannah's recent behavior and attitude didn't seem to match my own teenage defiance. Even trying to have a serious conversation with John turned out like this. So, after Hannah got out of the bath, I decided to visit her room. Hannah, can I talk to you for a sec? What? When I entered her room after she had bathed, she was wrapped in her blanket, turning her back to me in the dimly lit room. I just want to talk. Can I turn on the light? Do you need something? I'm tired and want to rest. Hannah's response was unusually cold. Just like John said, it seemed as if she found even talking to me bothersome, as if she was saying, stay away from me. The vibe was palpable. But I'm an adult. I'm used to dealing with difficult clients at work. I won't be easily discouraged by such an attitude. Undeterred by her coldness, I sat down at the foot of her bed and spoke gently to her turned back. I hate beating around the bush, so I'll just ask directly. Did something happen while I was away? Anything at school or at home, anything is fine. You've lost a lot of weight, Hannah. If there's something, I want you to feel free to tell me. We're family, after all. It might have been a cliché. But the words that came out were genuinely from my heart. They weren't just to gauge her reaction. Perhaps my words struck a chord, as I noticed Hannah flinch slightly. Family. Her word, seeking confirmation, made me nod emphatically with a smile. Yes, we're family, right? I may not have had much time because of work, but I've always cared and worried about you. So, if there's something, rely on me. I definitely have the means to protect you. I truly believed that. Even if Hannah was facing difficulties at school, I knew there were countless ways to rescue her from such a situation. If it required money, I had the resources to spend any amount necessary. Protecting one child was certainly within my capabilities. Hearing my words filled with confidence, Hannah peeked out from the blanket, looking at me with a pained expression. Will you really protect me? Allie, will you help me? Of course. After all, I'm your sister, aren't I? Just when Hannah was about to confide in me. At that moment, her room door burst open, and John entered. The instant Hannah saw John, her face turned pale. Concerned, I stood in front of John as if to protect her. "What are you two whispering about?" John, with a friendly smile, looked not at me but at Hannah. I used to like that seemingly kind smile of his, but now it only filled me with disgust. It wasn't directed at me but felt like a threat to Hannah. "It's nothing. Allie, I'm fine, really. Just leave me alone. I'm just tired from school." Hannah must have sensed my wariness towards John. Before he could say more, she raised her voice, making it sound as though I was the one pestering her, and ushered both John and me out of the room. Fortunately, Hannah's room had a lock, and I heard it click from inside. For now, John couldn't reach her. Their interaction and John's expression made it clear something was amiss between them. The question was what happened. Probing further could be risky as John isn't foolish. Pressing the issue could affect Hannah. That's the last thing I wanted. "I told you earlier, right? Hannah is just going through a typical teenage rebellion. Let her be," John said, smiling kindly but his eyes not following suit. Instead, there was a threatening undertone in his words. It felt like he was saying, "Don't act on your own. Abandoning her just because she's in a rebellious phase isn't right for a parent." Even when I was rebellious, my parents never gave up on me. Thanks to them, I felt their love. But I wouldn't back down. My parents faced my teenage years head-on, and that's a fact. It shaped who I am today. So, his argument doesn't hold water with me. However, my retort seemed to irk John slightly, as I saw a twitch in his temple. "You haven't even had a child, but you're quick to speak up, aren't you? I wish you'd save those comments for when you have actual experience raising a child from a young age." I was speechless. I couldn't comprehend how he could say such unbelievable, inhuman words. Was this the real John? Was the person I had seen until now all an act? The thought crossed my mind just as Hannah's face popped into my head. Perhaps Hannah had been subjected to such words from John when I wasn't around. Thinking back, Hannah never avoided me when it was just the two of us. In fact, she often stayed close when I was around. But she always ran away whenever John came into the living room or tried to join a conversation. Maybe his emotionally abusive behavior was the reason. Even when we were planning to go out as a threesome, Hannah seemed like she wanted to say something to me. But John had stopped her. Does Hannah know something she shouldn't say in front of me? Is that why John is so desperate to keep Hannah and me from talking? Lost in these thoughts, I was slow to respond to John's words. He laughed triumphantly, placed his hand on my shoulder, and spouted some nonsensical words of encouragement. "Got it? If you understand, then stop meddling in Hannah's business. It'll save you from unnecessary hurt." For now, I decided to back off. Pressing further could raise his suspicions. I feigned understanding and headed to the bathroom, away from him. As I was about to step into the bathtub, I noticed something brown floating in the water. Hannah was the last one to use the bathroom, and a question formed in my mind. In high school, I dealt with irregular periods and had seen similar symptoms when I visited a gynecologist. Back then, the issues with my menstrual cycle caused me to fall ill, as it weakened my immune system and I caught a cold. Perhaps Hannah's pale complexion was also due to a similar female-specific health issue. Concerned, I decided to talk to Hannah the next morning and went to her room. "Hannah, I need to talk to you." John had already left for work, and the house was empty. Hannah usually shows up in the living room around this time, but today, she was nowhere to be seen. Concerned, I headed to her room, and the door slowly opened, unlocked from the inside. However, there was no response from Hannah. When I peeked inside, my eyes widened in shock. "Hannah?" There she was, collapsed on the floor, having mustered just enough strength to unlock the door. I rushed to lift her, sensing the severity of the situation from her body's heat and her labored breathing. Immediately, I called an ambulance and we headed to the hospital. "Allie!" The hospital we arrived at was a large one, run by my sister and her husband. My sister is a gynecologist there. And my brother-in-law is a doctor specializes in internal medicine, well respected in the community. There are symptoms of joint pain due to high fever, so it's likely a viral cold. But I'm concerned about the brown liquid you mentioned in the bath, so it's best she also sees a gynecologist. I've arranged for that, so please head to the gynecology department," my brother-in-law said, quickly facilitating Hannah's examination. During the checkup, a troubling issue came to light. Allie, come here for a moment. My sister called me into another room, her face grave. Another doctor stood beside her, adding to the tense atmosphere. Swallowing hard, I braced for potentially serious news, wondering if it was more than just menstrual irregularities. Allie, have you ever seen Hannah's body? What? Her unexpected question caught me off guard. Confused, I stared at her, trying to grasp the meaning behind her inquiry, when my brother-in-law joined us after knocking. Sorry, I had to inform your husband about the situation. What's going on? Please, stay calm. There's a possibility that Hannah has been mistreated by John regularly. The doctor revealed, leaving me stunned, while my brother-in-law listened gravely. When we asked Hannah to undress for the examination, she vehemently refused to let her inner thighs and abdomen be touched. However, we needed to check to rule out cancer or other diseases. Once we managed to examine her, we found something alarming: bruises in places where they shouldn't normally be. My sister, who conducted the initial examination, suspected something and called in another gynecologist to discuss the bruises. They decided it was necessary to involve the director, my brother-in-law, and include a guardian in the conversation, so they called me into a separate room. We found this as well. There are multiple bruises on her sides and areas covered by her uniform. The intensity of the bruises suggests they were inflicted recently. Some are fading, indicating ongoing abuse. You mentioned John has been around Hannah more since your work schedule lightened. Haven't you seen anything? The conversation was overwhelming, and I struggled to process it. John being abusive towards Hannah. But they seemed like a normal father and daughter. Why would this happen? That's when an unpleasant premonition struck me. As Hannah entered high school, her physical development became noticeable. She matured into a womanly figure. Even I noticed how adult-like she's become. I hate to think it, but if John started seeing her not as his child but as a woman? I pondered my sister's words, horrified by the implication. And if what I imagined was actually happening? The mere thought sent chills down my spine. Sensing my distress, the doctor gripped my shoulder, looked at me intently, and said, Allie, you need to divorce him now. What? The doctor's earnest eyes confirmed the seriousness of her statement. Hannah is likely suffering terrible abuse from John. It's unforgivable to do this to one's own daughter. We'll report this to Child Services and can even alert the police if necessary. Later, my sister shared that she had suffered from poor treatment by her parents. It is why she couldn't remain detached and became emotional. The firm grip on my shoulder conveyed the urgency and sincerity of their words. Is it okay to leave Hannah in this situation? No, it's absolutely unacceptable. Please, help me. I want to protect Hannah. Everyone nodded in agreement, and we devised a plan to safeguard her. I'm home. For now, I returned home while Hannah stayed in the hospital. Given the viral infection and signs of dehydration, my sister and her husband arranged for her admission to ensure her safety. Unaware of everything, John returned home at his usual time. He was puzzled by Hannah's absence. Huh? Where's Hannah? Hasn't she come back yet? Hannah's in the hospital. She collapsed from a high fever today. What? Naturally, he was shocked since I hadn't informed him about any of it beforehand. When I relayed only the details of Hannah's condition, John seemed relieved. I also mentioned that she might be discharged tomorrow if her fever subsides and her condition stabilizes, to which John forced a smile, trying to appear like a good husband. So, she might be discharged tomorrow. That's good. If you're off work for this, you should go back tomorrow, right? I'll take the day off and pick up Hannah. There's no need for that. What? At that moment, the doorbell rang. Who is it at this hour? John, likely curious about my earlier statement, wanted to inquire further, but the insistent doorbell interrupted him. Annoyed, John checked the monitor and saw two men in suits standing outside. Who might you be? Sorry to disturb you at this late hour. We're from the Child Welfare Office. Child Welfare? At the mention of child welfare, John visibly panicked. While observing his reaction, I headed to the door and let them in. Sorry for the intrusion. We received a call from the hospital today about a resident here, Hannah Scott, and wanted to discuss her situation. One man looked stern, clearly a no-nonsense type, while the other explained the situation softly, greeting to John as we led them into the living room. Child welfare here for my daughter. What could be the issue? John was clearly unnerved by their presence. If there were no problems, he wouldn't be sweating like this. His reaction made it obvious he had done something to warrant a visit from child welfare. He must have threatened and silenced Hannah, warning her of worse consequences if she spoke up. He must have been using those words to deter her. So their unexpected arrival was completely unforeseen for him. Even though Hannah had been to the hospital, she must have managed to cover things up. He was so complacent that he didn't show any signs of panic when I spoke. "Oh, your husband seems to have no clue." Clue? Who would expect child welfare to visit over their daughter? Has something happened to Hannah? There's been nothing unusual at home. If anything, it must be school-related. My wife and I are on good terms. There are no issues in our home. It's said that liars often talk too much, and John's words were a perfect example. He was trying to divert the conversation, acting as if he was oblivious to the whole situation. To shake him further, the soft-spoken man presented a document. "Is that so? Then you wouldn't know about these bruises on Hannah's body, would you?" The moment the photos were shown, the color drained from John's face. He hadn't expected child welfare to know so much, thinking they wouldn't visit without a reason. His sweat was visible, and his breathing became noticeably erratic. It was clear this wasn't the reaction of someone ignorant of the situation. "Do you think we came here without any thought, Mr. Scott? We've received a report from the hospital, and we've already spoken with Hannah herself. If you continue to lie, it will only make your situation worse." The professional man pressed. They must be accustomed to handling situations like this. Overwhelmed, John blurted out in panic. "There's no evidence I did this. Maybe someone at school did it, or maybe my wife." "Yes. You've been going into her room recently. What did you do to her?" Cornered, John stood up, trying to shift the blame to me. It was astonishing how poorly he was handling the situation, inspiring more disgust than anger. Any feelings of sadness had long since vanished, replaced by sheer disbelief that left me with no desire to even speak. "Enough!" the stern man commanded, his authoritative tone making John falter and sit down abruptly on the floor. Intimidated by those commanding words, John's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, looking up at the stern man from his seated position. "You had a chance here, Mr. Scott, but instead of confessing, you've turned against your wife, trying to save yourself. Realize the gravity of your actions." "What do you mean?" With that, I showed John Hannah's hidden diary, possible audio evidence, and a video on my phone. "This. Hannah spoke to us at the hospital, crying. She revealed how you threatened and abused her, warning her not to consult me or I'd suffer the same fate." Afterward, I attempted to visit Hannah in her hospital room. Fortunately, thanks to the four, she seemed a bit better and honestly shared everything with me. It all started when she became a high school student. John began looking at Hannah, who had grown more womanly, with ulterior motives in his eyes. Feeling disgusted, she started avoiding him, but that only amused John, and his behavior escalated. He began attempting to dominate Hannah physically. When Hannah resisted, John thought to use me as leverage. Knowing she cared for me, he made a deal, her silence in exchange for my safety. Kind-hearted Hannah sacrificed herself, and John thwarted any attempt she made to reach out to me. Driven to the edge, Hannah's health deteriorated, leading to her current condition. We have testimonies from Hannah's friends too, confirming she had confided in them. With all this evidence, there's no escaping the truth. They added, impressed by their quick work within just a few hours. I'm grateful for how much has been accomplished in just a few hours. Without the support of my sister and her husband, along with Hannah's courage, we wouldn't have been able to corner John like this. Cornered, John wept miserably, begging for forgiveness on his knees. I'm just a little bit in the devil's way. It was just a little bit of a devil's advocate. I thought that cheating on my daughter would be better than holding back with someone else. But I was wrong. So please forgive me. I will never do this again. But those words wouldn't sway the child welfare officials. They remained unflinchingly stern. Desperate, John shifted his target and clung to my legs. Allie, it's not true. It was just a joke. I didn't realize it would go this far. Please, forgive me. Let's start over as a family of 3. I'll change, I promise. His tears and pleas were pitiful, but I had no intention of forgiving him. I shook him off and lashed out with harsh words I had never used before. Disgusting. Don't touch me with your filthy hands. Ali, I will never forgive you for the wounds you've inflicted on Hannah. We will certainly divorce, and I will ensure that you are punished for the harm you've caused to her body and mind. No amount of money can heal her wounds, but that won't be the end of it. I will report this matter to the police. And I will take her in. I will adopt her and welcome her into my home. What? John must have grasped the meaning of those words. Adopting her as my child meant that Hannah and I would become a legally recognized family through special adoption, severing her parental ties with John. If we proceeded with this and applied the stalking restraining order against John, it would prevent him from ever contacting Hannah again. Without the parent-child relationship, he would have no legal way to find out her whereabouts, ensuring her safety from his reach. I won't allow it. How can a stranger like you take away my precious daughter? We're no longer strangers, I shouted back, tired of his incessant denial. She's my daughter, my family. Stop playing the father now, and don't you dare say her name with that vile voice. I won't let you near her again. If you do anything to her, I'll make sure you pay, even if it means chasing you to the ends of the earth. At that moment, John, overwhelmed with rage, raised his fist at me. But the stern man quickly restrained him, and the other man called the police, leading to John's arrest. Thus, I successfully protected Hannah from him. We went through with the divorce and the special adoption, making us officially family. John was sentenced to prison, facing at least 6 years behind bars. With the restraining order in place, Hannah's safety was secured. We moved to a new home with a concierge and secured entry. And John was ordered to pay nearly $200,000 in damages for his actions, including the alimony and compensation for his last-minute assault. After her hospital discharge, Hannah tearfully apologized for her silence and the trouble she caused. Grateful for my protection. Silly girl, you don't have to think like that. I gently chided her. Children are supposed to be a handful for their parents. That's how you'll learn to embrace your own kids' troubles when you're older. We're family, so stop worrying about it. I'm your mom and your sister, I assured her, smiling warmly, and she nodded back, her face alight with happiness. Seeing her smile, I vowed to protect it for the rest of my life.